this year, there's going to be a cup and truck. Hopefully. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
I think the lights, Joe? The Toronto Telegram once reported that Collingwood's main exports were hockey players and ships. The looming bulkheads standing guard over Collingwood are long gone, as are the vivid memories of that first hockey game played on the Inner Harbour more than 100 years ago. Hockey was etched into the natural ice of the outdoors, sharing the frozen waters with ships and sailors. Collingwood's hockey factory began production in 1894 and quickly became a leader in the province. Enterprise Bulletin editor Jack McMurtry wrote that these working-class heroes touched up the local picture with liberal dashes of color and romance, stamina and courage. Let's go back in time. 16 years after Confederation, in 1883, a rink on the west side of Pine Street was built primarily for skating and hockey. Recreational and speed skating were both popular then, with Tuesday night public skating attracting up to 400 townspeople, sometimes serenaded by a live band. It was in the mid-1890s in both the Enterprise and the Bulletin newspapers that short announcements were published on the back page asking people interested in hockey to attend a meeting above Carpenter's drugstore. According to other accounts, the Grand Central Hotel was the birthplace of hockey in Collingwood. The population was just under 5,000, and times were tough back then. Hockey was new, rinks were few and far between, rules were vague, and there wasn't much money to go around. The first game of hockey played in Collingwood was against an experienced Barrie team that ended in a 9-4 victory for the visitors. On the roster for Collingwood were Tyson in net, Watts, Rowley, Noble, O'Leary, Anderson, Campbell, and Pratt. As hockey grew, so did interest in local newspaper coverage. Hockey news began to appear on the front pages of both newspapers, where at one time the only sports mentioned were curling or ice skating races. The game sparked immediate interest. A Simcoe County League, including Collingwood, Barrie, and Bradford, started in 1895, and 1 year later the Collingwood Hockey Club iced a team in the newly formed Ontario Hockey Association. The OHA was founded in 1890 to govern amateur ice hockey. This was the idea of Arthur Stanley, son of Lord Stanley, then Governor-General of Canada. From 1893 to 1908, teams from the OHA could and did challenge for the Dominion Hockey Challenge Cup, which became the Stanley Cup. Outstanding athlete Norm Rule, 17, was one of these young pioneers who gathered to discuss the birth of hockey. He was the first game's youngest player, and with Rule in goal, the Collingwood Hockey Club would go on to win 2 Northern Ontario Hockey Championships in 1898 and 1899. The 60-minute game, 2 periods of 30 minutes, was played between 7 players a side, and there were no nets, just 2 pieces of straight iron driven into the ice. The photo here was taken in 1937 during a reenactment of that first game. The rink was the harbour, and the game was played in the great outdoors. Here's a photo from the Collingwood Museum of that first OHA hockey team. In the back, Date Andrews, A.L. Campbell, E.H. Telfer, Ed Elworthy, W.S. Fair. In the middle, H. Trott, on the executive, team captain Bill Toner, and M. Carpenter, executive. Up front are Norm Rule and Reg Brown. Collingwood had contending teams in 1904, 05, and 06, and reached the Ontario Finals for the first time in 1907 against the Berlin Union Jacks from Kitchener. They lost the series by a single goal. Here's one of the team players, Tom Collins, who played professionally in Minneapolis and Manitoba. 1909 marked the official opening of Park Arena on Hume Street, which is now the curling club, to set the stage for one of the most successful championship decades ever in Collingwood. The town's first well-known hockey star was the extremely talented Ernie Fryer. He turned down contract offers from the Montreal Canadiens in order to stay and play in Collingwood. Between 1910 and 1920, Captain Fryer led the blue and gold colored Collingwood club to 5 intermediate championships. Here's the 1910 provincial champions. Among the team members were Dance, Burns, and goaltender Frank Cook, and of course, Ernie Fryer. Another pick, this one of the 1918 champions, and just as a matter of fact, Ernie Fryer kept playing hockey for more than 30 years, and I think his last game was when he was 48 years old. During the same decade, Collingwood women dominated on the ice with players including Fern and Ruth Jackman, and just names, I don't have first names, Miss Ganley, Miss Burmester, Miss McFadden, Miss Collins, Miss Gawley, and Miss Train. And here's a photo of the original South End Junior Town League champions of 1933. In the front row, Bill Hillen, Skip Johnson, Les Martin, and in the back row, Arnold Prentice, Aubrey Morrison, Bob Stoutenberg, Harold Sproul, Lauren Morrison, Lloyd Pickering. Herb Kahn, the coach and the manager, is in the background. Collingwood experienced some depressing years in the late 1920s and the early 1930s until the junior shipbuilders skated into the hearts of citizens with an exciting brand of high-tempo hockey in 1937. It would be the start of a future dynasty in thrilling junior hockey in Collingwood. Meanwhile, the shipbuilders captured the intermediate championship in 1939 over Port Colborne. Hockey was steadily growing in popularity in the community through junior and senior town leagues and among public schools and high schools. The turning point of the century took place late in the 1940s with the construction of a majestic new arena, a cathedral for hockey, featuring an ice surface larger than Maple Leaf Gardens. The foresight by town leaders and citizens in building this beautiful facility ought to be applauded and survived a public vote by a 3-to-1 margin. Workers from the shipyards riveted the steel frame and the concrete blocks were made in Collingwood. The cost to build this beautiful shrine was just $200,000 and included a local fundraising campaign. Journalist and author Scotty Carmichael wrote that it was fitting Collingwood be rewarded with one of the finest artificial ice arenas in the country because this town ranks high in the pioneering of the great Canadian national game. Her record can be compared with any centre in the Dominion. The new tenants liked their new digs. The shipbuilders helped christen the community arena with a 10-5 win over Georgetown in 1948. It was during this decade that Collingwood had 2 intermediate teams that stabilized the ship, the A Shipbuilders and the B Sailors. The Collingwood Juveniles, meanwhile, scored the first provincial championship on home ice in 1949. The Collingwood Minor Hockey System has captured 20 Ontario Minor Hockey Association championships over its almost 70-year history. And there's the banners in Eddie Bush. Well, it's now Eddie Bush. The 1950s was the golden era for hockey in Collingwood. Perhaps no other community in Canada reached the pinnacle of the exploits of the junior and senior hockey teams playing out of Collingwood. And I wonder why the referee's right into the net there. The Junior C Green Shirts captured 4 consecutive championships, a feat that may never be matched in the OHA. The Green Shirts were named Team of the Century by the OHA. If the green shirts were the heart of Collingwood, then the shipbuilders were the soul. Collingwood's intermediate team notched 2 Ontario championships early in the 50s against Fort Erie and Simcoe, and almost earned a third before losing to Simcoe in the finals. The Juveniles were 1956-57 champions. In Collingwood's centennial year of 1958, the Enterprise Bulletin was lamenting the impact that television was having on senior hockey in town. But hockey ships and sailors still drove newspaper coverage of a community at work and at play. Collingwood youngsters learned to work, then to play hockey, the newspaper wrote. Here are the 1960-61 Northern Hockey League champions. In the back row, Flash Hutchison, Bill Curry, Duke Windsor, Dick Leonard, question mark, I'm not sure, Wayne Perrin, Howard Sheffield, Ike White, Claire Miller. In the front row, Arlo Hogg, Frank McCutcheon, George Rowling, Frank Simonato, Ronnie Cox, Harvey Perrin, and Eddie Sheffield. There are hundreds of highlights in hockey history. Among them was this magical memory, an amazing 3-goal performance in 1974 by Collingwood's Don Westbrook. Playing for the Seattle Totems of the WHL, Westbrook became the only North American hockey player to score 3 goals in a game against the amazing Vladislav Tretiak. In 1976, the Junior B Collingwood Blues were provincial finalists, losing in an exciting 7-game series against St. Mary's. The Collingwood Shipbuilders won the provincial senior title in their last season, 1986-87. In 1991, Collingwood hosted the Team Canada training camp for the Canada Cup. The rink has also been used for training camps by the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Montreal Canadiens. A who's who of hockey have skated on Collingwood's ice over the years. Bobby Orr, Howie Morenz, Wayne Gretzky, Paul Coffey, Brendan Shanahan, Carey Price, Connor McDavid. The list is endless. "13 years ago, the Jean Vanier girls senior team captured the OFSA championship in 2004. Collingwood hockey players have skated professionally throughout the world. 14 Collingwood Sports Hall of Fame inductees have lived the ultimate Canadian dream, proudly pulling on sweaters to represent these 20 NHL teams. The sheet of ice is the stage where championships are won and lost. Collingwood players have reached the pinnacle of hockey by winning major titles, including the Memorial Cup, the Calder Cup, the Allen Cup, the Goodall Cup, the IIHF Cup, and the Turner Cup in junior, AHL, senior, central, and Aussie hockey leagues. 3 Collingwood players have their names engraved on the Stanley Cup, the holy grail of all trophies. They are Reg Noble with the Toronto Arenas and the Toronto State Pats and the Montreal Maroons, Byrne Brophy with the Maroons, and Jack Portland while a Boston Bruin. Charles Portland with the Sudbury Wolves and Darryl Sly with the Trail Smoke Eaters both were world champions. A handful of Collingwood players suited up for the beloved Toronto Maple Leafs: Reg Noble, Jim Herberts, Darryl Sly, Randy Osborne, and Claire Alexander. In the modern game, there are at least 4 Collingwood-born players who rise to the top tier of hockey. Reg Noble, number 55 on the all-time Toronto Maple Leafs Top 100, is a member of the Hockey Hall of Fame, the holder of several current Toronto Maple Leafs records from the 1917-18 season 100 years ago, including hat tricks with 5, goals per game, and points per game. He finished 3rd in the NHL's 1917-18 scoring race. Jack Portland was Stanley Cup champion as a member of the Boston Bruins in 1939 and represented Canada at the 1932 Los Angeles Olympics in high jump and triple jump. Portland was a solid blue liner with 3 of the original 6 NHL teams and played alongside Maurice Richard and Howie Morenz. Memorial Cup champion Eddie Bush was Mr. Hockey. Scotty Carmichael wrote, "Hockey was his living and his life, and he put a lot more into the game than he ever took out." Described as brash, flamboyant, and swashbuckling, Eddie Bush was credited with bringing hockey glory back to Collingwood in the early 50s, after making his mark in the National Hockey League for parts of 2 seasons, wearing a Detroit Red Wings uniform. He held the impressive 40-year record for scoring the most points by a defenseman in one NHL game. The ultimate champion, Darryl Sly, was on 14 championship teams. He was a member of the 1961 World Champion Trail Smoke Eaters. He played for the Vancouver Canucks, Toronto Maple Leafs, and Minnesota North Stars, and was Calder Cup champion of the AHL 3 times and silver medalist at the 1960 Squaw Valley Olympics. And Sly was Don Cherry's defense partner for 6 years. There have been tragic, heartbreaking events in Collingwood's hockey history. On March 4th, 1953, Bob Gillies of Stayner, playing for the Green Shirts, was checked from behind by Aurora's Walter Fines and slammed headfirst into the boards. It was in an 8-2 game in favor of the Green Shirts with 2 minutes left. The hit was described as loud as a rifle shot. Gillies was a 17-year-old rookie defenseman. He died on the way to a Toronto hospital. Fines was found not guilty of manslaughter in a Barrie courtroom. Born in the Netherlands and moving to Collingwood as a youngster, Ed Kia learned to skate when he was 13 years old and never took a full shift in an organized game until he was 18. He went on to play 583 games in the NHL with the Atlanta Flames and the St. Louis Blues. He was the first player born in the Netherlands to score a goal in the NHL and won awards recognizing outstanding humanitarian and community service. He was playing for the Salt Lake Golden Eagles, the Blues farm team, in 1983 when he suffered severe head trauma after a hit by George McPhee, now general manager of the Vegas Golden Knights. The injury left him physically and mentally disabled. NHL Players Association's Alan Eagleson had not paid insurance premiums that would have kept all union members equally covered, meaning career-ending injuries that happened away from an NHL game were no longer covered. This was one of the incidents that led Russ Conway to write the book that scorched Eagleson called Game Misconduct, Alan Eagleson and the Corruption of Hockey. Ed Kia died in 1999 at the age of 51. Collingwood's most recent minor hockey graduate to make it all the way to the NHL is Kevin Cawley, who collected 205 points as an Oshawa General in the OHL. He was finally with the New York Islanders after 6 years in the East Coast and American Leagues when a headfirst collision into the boards in his 16th NHL game broke his neck in January 2006. 2 surgeries were required to stabilize his neck, accomplished with 8 screws, 2 plates, and 2 pins. Less than 1 month later, he announced his retirement and went into coaching. Since its official beginning in 1894, hockey has helped define generations of families in the Collingwood area. The Friars, the Morrells, the Walmsleys, the Slys, the Dances, the Brophies, the Sheffields, the Portlands, and the Burmisters are a collection of many Collingwood families who have carved a legacy playing Canada's national sport. Here are Roy and Norm Burmister with New Haven, Bern and Mike Brophy playing in Cleveland, Albert and Barney Walmsley, and there are others, Charles and Jack Portland, Clarence and George Butters, Ed and Lloyd Young, among others. Whoop, back one there. Father-son combinations include Jack and Frank Dance, Reg and Don Westbrook. And I think that's John Westbrook, the other goalie, but that's Donnie Westbrook. As well as John and Britt Burns, Bobby and Alan Morrow, and Tom and Kevin Colley. Hockey is not just a white person's sport. In Collingwood's Great White North, the Sheffield family emerges whose roots run 6 generations deep. Before Willie O'Ree hit the ice in the NHL, Howard Sheffield was a trailblazer. Along with Art Lowe and Gary Smith, Sheffield was part of the Black Flashes line in Mount Forest, playing in the Western Ontario Senior Hockey League. While the players were well received by their teammates in the community, such was not the case when they played on the road in places like Durham, Hanover, or Walkerton. Howard, who was skilled and swift, was asked to go and play for the Quebec Aces. At the time, Jean Beliveau, Punchimlack, and another famous black hockey player named Herb Carnegie were on that team. 3 of Howard's nephews, the sons of Frank Sr. and Jasmine, who were Frank Jr., as well as Reg and Ray, who pursued various hockey destinations with remarkable character and skill. The oldest, Frank, a defenseman, was the captain of the Ryerson Rams varsity team in Toronto before joining the Barrie Flyers. Frank's here tonight. Okay. Brother Reg played Junior A for Orillia, Junior B for Collingwood, won the Ontario College Championship with Georgian Grizzlies in Barrie, and won an Ontario Intermediate B Championship with the Creemore Chiefs. Reg was a record holder for the Collingwood Blues as a scoring leader and was first in penalty minutes for many years. Reg's twin Ray achieved hockey success down under by leading his team to the Goodall Cup, the Stanley Cup of Australia, reserved for the top team on the continent. The Goodall Cup is the oldest trophy and is currently in the Hockey Hall of Fame in Toronto. Ray was captain of the Newcastle North Stars during the 4 championship runs. In 2015, the club retired as number 19 and raised his jersey before a capacity crowd. Hockey was also in Carol Brophy's DNA. She is the daughter of Byrne and was a power skating coach for 3 decades, from the 1970s to the 1990s. Brophy Collins taught a collection of some of hockey's elite players from across North America. She gained valuable insight while studying at the Institute of Sport and Physical Culture in the USSR and with the Red Army Hockey Club, majoring in hockey. Daryl Sly's granddaughter Morgan is one of Collingwood's greatest and smartest hockey players and played on scholarship at Princeton University with the Tigers. Morgan is currently in medical school. Prior to today's composite sticks, our sporting symbol, the hockey stick, was rooted in the lumber industry. Bill Kirby, hockey stick and ski manufacturer, was based in Collingwood in the 1940s. I've also read that the Morrows were involved in stick making. In hockey's early rules, goalies were forbidden to fall or kneel to make a save. Thanks to the modern game, a goalie equipment manufacturer, Brown Hockey Equipment, moved to Collingwood in the late 1970s. Speaking of goalies, the next 2 slides show the evolution of the Collingwood netminder. Here are Frank Cook, Norm Burmester, and Reg Westbrook, Don Hudson, Donnie Rich, and Lindsay Middlebrook. Now I know Don's here tonight, and you didn't wear a mask all the way through, right? You didn't play with it. That was later on. Among our fiercest competitors who instilled order in the arena were Don Keith, John Walton, and Clarence Rusty Butters, who reminded hockey foes that Collingwood couldn't or wouldn't be pushed around. Here are 2 of my favorite hockey players, Collingwood's Claire Alexander and the great one, a young Wayne Gretzky, teammates with the Edmonton Oilers. This photo was taken at the 1979 WHA All-Star Game. Just a couple more slides. Hockey builders in the National Hockey League, Pro Scouts, Nip Spooner of the Toronto Maple Leafs, and hockey player and coach Jeep Jackson with the California Golden Seals back in their playing days. Hockey remains a passion born in youth. It merges generations. Our great made in Collingwood history teaches us about the work ethic needed to build mighty ships and championship teams. Collingwood fell in love with Canada's game, and it fell in love with Collingwood. The people, the fans, should be proud. Thank you very much for listening tonight.